Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the first episode of our People Enablement webinar series presented by Human Resources Today and sponsored by Impraise. I'm Shelley. I'm the site manager of Human Resources Today. I'm sure I'm a familiar face by now, and hopefully some of the faces I have up here are familiar too. Hopefully you're a repeat listener. If this is your first time, then welcome. This is particularly an exciting episode to be here for because this is a panel discussion. It's one of the first times we've ever had a panel discussion on Human Resources Today, and I'm super excited to be presenting this. So without any further ado, I want to make sure we thank Impraise and just give them a shout out for helping us to make this happen. They're a fantastic people enablement platform. They help you develop your professional talent, and they can help you with a whole lot of basically any questions that you have about people engagement at work. So thanks again, Impraise. Before we jump into the webinar proper, I want to make sure that you're all aware that if you have any questions, you can drop them into the questions panel on the right side of your screen. My colleague Hannah is here with me today. She will be fielding questions and passing them to me to pass on to the panelists. So go ahead and say hi to her. Let her know that you're listening. That's always good for all of us to know that we have an audience out there paying attention. Lastly, if you have any audio issues today, please feel free to try dialing in by phone. You can do this by going to the audio panel, again, on the right side of your screen, and just selecting the switch to phone option and dialing in. All right, so let's get into the introductions of the fantastic panelists that we've rounded up for you today. I have to start off by saying I'm very sorry that Jo is not able to make it. She had a last-minute emergency come up. I believe one of her colleagues broke her ankle, and Jo has had to go fill in for her. So our thoughts and best wishes are with Jo's colleague and with Jo today. We hope everything turns out okay there. But we do have Miles. Miles is here, and he is a consultant who has been working with teams, and he's been the manager of teams for a very long time. He's applying agile techniques to people management and enablement, and he's going to bring a really interesting perspective to this, which I just can't wait to hear. And of course, Jeffrey is also a fantastic speaker. He's been in the staffing world for over 20 years and currently is the senior sourcing specialist at Walmart. Jeffrey always has fantastic stories to share, and I'm super excited to be working with him. And then, of course, last but not least is Lilian, who I got to meet at a PIRA conference. She has so many fresh and I want to say like right on the edge new ideas for what we need to bring to HR, how we put the human back into human resources. I know it's a bit of a cliche, but when you're talking to her, it really isn't. She really has some fantastic ideas about this. So Jeffrey, Miles, and Lilian, welcome everyone to today's panel.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So I've pulled our agenda up here on the front page, and I think I'd like to just kick off with this question of communicating clear direction. So the topic of this webinar is about clarity, and it's about how clarity, communicating effectively with your employees can make a world of difference when it comes to their performance and also getting them kind of excited and on board about what you're doing with the company. So the very first topic that we have about this is how do you communicate clear direction with respect to company goals and overall vision? And who wants to start off? Lilian, I'm going to pick on you.
All right, so yeah, this is a question I think it would take a lot more than an hour for me to describe what I actually would suggest. But I've been working with very forward-thinking organizations recently, and learning new ways that companies are using to communicate with employees besides the original and traditional town halls and presentations and memos and emails and letters and things like that. When it comes to culture and in today's world, you cannot only rely on that kind of communication. So when the leadership has a vision and a strategy that they want to present to distribute to the employees or communicate to the employees. It's important that is not only, also it's important that you don't rely only on verbal communication, right? So you have to develop creative ways to, sorry, I lost my track. You have to develop creative ways to infuse that communication into all the different places and stages where employee gets in contact with the company information. So for example, you have, I would suggest that you have an employee roadmap or a journey map where you identify the different touch points where you're going to have the opportunity to communicate your vision, your objectives, and or the strategy. So let's say the employee onboarding program is one example of a very important moment where the employee will have lots of questions about that. And it's important that you find ways to infuse that information. Now, when I say infuse that information, it doesn't mean to write a PowerPoint full of slides with, this is our vision, this is our goal, and this is what you need to do. My work with my agency is really to develop creative ways of doing that. So experiences and campaigns where that involves lots of videos and hashtags and finding employees where they are today. So social media and collaboration tools such as Slack, Yammer, Workplace by Facebook, and getting that information in different ways, very subtly, where employees don't feel like they're being told to do things and to follow those directions. Does that make sense?
I like the way you said that, because to me, the first part of it is even before that. You need, Shelley and I have spoken about this before, you need there is no accurate communication in a hierarchical environment. When one person has power of any type over another person, the person without the power is going to shade whatever they say to the person with power. There's the fear of retribution from getting fired to 100 other ways of that. And you first have to have a culture of communication where both the good and the bad are shared. And then I love what you said about how you have to use social media in the right way. And I joke all the time that, I don't know, can I say Glassdoor, Shelley? I'm not mocking it. I'm just going to say Glassdoor has 3 types of people who write reviews: human resources shills, angry and embittered employees, and the occasional person who comes on and tells the truth. And people know that, so they already take the person who's telling the truth with a grain of salt, because they could be an angry, disgruntled employee or an HR shill put up to it. And in order to achieve the flow of the information you described, you first have to create the culture where it's okay to have information. Does that make sense, or did I ramble?
Yes.
And when you get into culture, one of the pieces, and it kind of ties what both of you are saying together, I think, is when you talk about integrating the message or integrating the communication into the system, and you talk about the worry that a reporting person would have to their boss, to their immediate supervisor. A big one here is measurement. And what you measure is going to define, to a large extent, your culture. And if you find a way to measure, for example, an employee's understanding of the communication, or an employee's participation in the communication, and especially if you do that in a voluntary way. I mean, you're now getting companies that as part of their internal network are creating their own social media that's within the company themselves, creating their own social media environment, creating their own world, as it were, on their intranets, and the engagement that can happen there. Participation in that, rewarding participation in those communication channels. Recognizing good participation in those communication channels is good. Another one that I would seriously look at, though, is arm your structure. I know that there's a lot of popularity in knocking hierarchies at this point. There's a big desire for flat management paradigms, and I think they have their place and they have significant advantages. They also have other places where they really need to not be, and they have disadvantages as well. When you do have a hierarchical structure, though, and that's at whether that's just one level or 4 levels deep, you need to arm each level with the information that they need to be able to draw a direct connection from any individual in the company, from their position all the way up to the vision at the top. And that requires a certain extra effort on being able to understand the vision in a relative context. And this is something that I notice in a lot of the presentations, a lot of the big presentations, when you do the big messages, you do the quarterly all hands or whatever it is that you're doing, that individual context gets lost. Yes, okay, so we understand that this is the financial goal that we're after. Yes, we understand that this is the moral high ground that we have in creating our product, and this is why we come to work every day. We understand all that. But I do, licensing over here in the corner, or I'm this marketing analyst that just looks at this little piece of data and this is my world. How does that relate to what we're dealing with? And I think it's actual leadership. I think it's leadership's responsibility to find ways to draw those connections together. And I think that the more that we can do to arm leadership with the information that they need to be able to have those conversations well, I think that's a really good service that we can provide. I'm not sure. I've seen contexts, I've seen environments, depending on senior leadership usually, where it goes really well. I've also seen situations where it goes very poorly. And when it goes poorly, you start to get a disconnect and you start hearing conversations about work-life balance. You start hearing conversations about, the vacation and sick time. And you have those conversations, which to me are always those morale indicators that you listen for. But on the other side, when you're communicating really well, you start hearing phrases like, I had this idea, or could we do it this way? This isn't working very well. We could do something else. There seems to be an engagement when you understand the vision, you understand your role in it, you understand how you contribute to the greater cause. We're a tribal society. We want to communicate to that global cause. We want to communicate. We want to contribute. When we provide the means and the communication for people to actually be able to contribute, then they do. And those communications,
Which is more important? The contribution or the feeling of the employee that they're contributing to a greater something?
I think there's a false dichotomy there.
How so?
I don't think there's any difference between the two. I think that the contribution, when it's aligned properly, when you align it with art and grace, the contribution that one feels they are giving and the value that they are actually delivering are one and the same. And that way they can be held accountable with their own sensation and their own feeling of value contribution. Now, that's when it's handled artfully. There aren't very many graceful and artful communicators out there that I've run into that can really inspire their teams that way. If there was a way to package that, I have a new business model that I need to go pursue because I'd make a lot of money at it. But I think that if you can find those communicators in your organization that do have that ability, to draw communication. I used to get asked, I would go to India fairly regularly, and I used to get asked to just have meetings with the team in India just to talk to them, because it would help bridge the gap of communication. It would help share the information they were looking for, while also inspiring and encouraging. And if you can find people like that, anchor them as champions to go out and free up a bit of their time to go out and be those communication champions as well.
I don't know if I necessarily agree. And
Okay.
I think it's maybe in my systemic way of looking at things from the bottom to the top as opposed to the top to the bottom. But I think about it in terms of a military example. When we ask young men and women to go and fight, they're not fighting for the country. They're fighting for the 20 guys and gals in their squad. They go out and face the fire so they're not shamed in front of their brothers and sisters in the squad, as opposed to doing it for a general. And I think the same thing holds true in business, that you work that your relationship with your smaller team is much more important than the messaging from on high, because those aren't people, especially in the larger bureaucracies and corporations, they don't have any reflection on what my day-to-day is. But like Jo Weech not being here today because she took care of her friend's ankle, that to me is where the messaging needs, where we need to do the most work in that to get those teams to function better from a smaller cellular level than looking at the whole body. And I want to go back to something you said earlier too, which was about flat organizations. And I agree with you. There's no such thing, and I always look at it in terms of George Orwell's George Orwell's Animal Farm. All the pigs are equal, but some pigs are more equal than others, and that's why there's no real flat organization.
I find your military example to be really curious, though, because in my service, when I was in the military, in my fire squad, it was the mission that was always first. And
enlisted or officer?
Enlisted. And it was the mission that was first. It was because all of the stuff that you're talking about, that may come in after the fact, but in the moment, when we're in the heat of the moment, there's a culture already of participation and engagement. I mean, I was combat arms, so that culture of engagement meant that there may be psychological reasons that aren't talked about, but what is talked about is the communication of the mission, the communication of getting the job done, and understanding the job that really needs to be done made it so that job was done really successfully. When we didn't know what the job was that we were supposed to be doing, or it wasn't clearly communicated, then the ability to achieve success, and thus the ability to contribute successfully, to have a successful mission, became really exponentially more difficult. And that was a huge moral drain when that happened. When we did have clear communication of the mission and the goals, and we knew our role in it,
I think there's
it was a different thing.
I'm sorry. I thought you.
No, that's fair.
I think there's no one or the other. I think that they're both complementary, and I think it's about having a very thought out communication strategy where you can understand the moments where you need to be communicating from an organizational level, from a corporate level, or within the team, because it's not, this doesn't apply for the companies that are not yet flat. So, a lot of companies are structured in a hierarchical way. So we're talking to a lot of people living in that kind of culture. And I feel like we can build up to that mindset and strategy where we build strong communication within the teams, but we're still operating in a different way. And I think that the mistake HR makes most of the times is that communication is a one-time thing, and if you don't read my email, it's because that's your fault, because I sent that information. You should have known. And communication is must be consistent and continuous throughout the employee life, and in all different levels. It's very complex, the way you create the strategy.
I think it's always really awesome to have disagreeing people on a panel, and I'm a little bit sorry that I do have to sort of step in as moderator role here and kind of leverage Lilian's comment to take us on to the next topic, which is, of course, that most organizations right now aren't flat, and part of your role as a manager or in HR is helping people achieve their career goals and their development within the company. So with all of this in mind, with this communication on a big scale, on a small scale, and as Lilian is pointing out, little touch points here and there, what is the most effective way to help people grow and develop within a company while staying in line with company objectives?
Yeah, there's an hour conversation. More than that.
I know, right? I'm good at this.
I don't believe that should be part of it, and I believe that you should always be helping the individual achieve whatever their career goals are. And if their career goals don't align with the company objectives, then you help them find a company that will. Because in My father worked at the same company for 38 years, started as the mail boy, finished as a senior partner, and retired. Who's going to do that today? Right? When I started in business, if you had less than 5 years at a company, everyone went, oh, that's a red flag. Now, if you have more than 2 years at a company, everyone goes, why did they stay so long? And I feel that when you're dealing with the human being without the company in mind, if their career goals line up with the company, you're going to be better for it. And if they don't, you're better knowing it now than 2 years of money and development into that person who already is going to leave no matter what. One of the things that I've done that has gotten me looks, shall we say, from senior management is I tell anyone, if you're looking, just come and tell me. And if I know someone, I'll help you get out. I'll fix your resume. And why do I do that? Because whether I did anything or not, they're going to leave. So now I know that they're leaving, so I can line up people to replace them. And now they'll be at another company and remember the experience where I was from a positive way. That's why I tell everyone, don't take a counteroffer. A counteroffer is just a hold until they can find someone better to replace you.
Yeah, that's really interesting because I'm one of those guys that would look a little sideways at that.
No, and I'm not saying you're wrong. I hope
No,
I hope I'm not. I can make the argument from your side as well.
I agree.
I just see it on the very one-to-one basis.
I think you're right, but there's a caveat here, and this is when you're dealing with highly valuable employees. When you have someone that has a specialized skill set that you just can't go out and hire off the street, when you have institutional knowledge that just can't be replaced, then finding a way to retain within the context of the company. Achieving career goals doesn't mean going into one job description and working that job description all the way up to the top. It does for a lot of engineers in software engineering, for example. It may, especially in larger companies, but it doesn't have to. Having a system where you can do lateral transfers to different roles and responsibilities and be able to do that gracefully so that if someone wants to stay with the company because they like the company, but they want to try something else for their own career development, if you can create an environment where that's an option, where you have that capability, that gives you a lot of flexibility on being able to respond to the desire of certain career goals that may or may not align to a particular job or role of responsibility. It may not align to some particular job description, but if you're willing to be flexible around those in order to keep your key people. The reality is we can't just allow, or we can't just take a lighthearted approach to key staff members and them being unhappy. Now there are some roles where we can't. If you have a waiting list of people in a certain field or a certain area where you have a supply chain, you can bring them in a very short order, or you have very, very brief training paradigms for that particular role where it doesn't take a long time to speed somebody up, then strategically I can see taking a lighter approach. But from the preservation of very, very core staff and from meaningful people, having options that allow those core staff to stay and be contributors, even if they're not contributing in the same way. Their core staff is not because they do a particular task well. It's because they're smart, they're engaged, they have a way of doing things that brings value to the company. And we want to preserve that in whatever role or whatever paradigm they want to have. Mm-hmm. If we can have them change their career plan, but stay in the company.
Yeah, and
I really like how you phrased it and talked about it there. I also feel as you get up that ladder, especially to the highly skilled individual, their skills have become very siloed for good or for ill. And that may not translate well within pursuing something different within the company. But you gave me a lot of food for thought there, Miles. I wanna think about this in more depth. The other thing I would say is that I feel everyone is a valuable. Oh, I want to phrase it the right way. I think you can have an expert who's a jerk and someone who needs to be trained in is a good person. And I'd rather always hire the good person and take 3, 6 months, 2 years training them than hire a person who is sandpaper but in human form and knows the work.
I'll hire the good person that has the skill.
I comment on like just itching here. My perception of this is that today we're having this discussion, and all your perspectives are very relevant and valuable, and I agree with both of you. But I also think that the future of work is bringing us a completely new scenario, and the new generations are also changing the way we're going to be choosing to align the company objectives with their career goals. Everything is changing very fast. And just to illustrate that, we have these new generations where people are, career goal is not necessarily a path, a career path. It could be, I want to be challenged. I want to learn a variety of things. I have a necessity of having a multidisciplinary role where I can interact with different diverse perspectives and roles. And then we also have companies that are doing what Miles was suggesting, the talent mobility, such as Spotify. I think they don't allow employees to stay in the same role for more than 2 years. So that's to exemplify how important that is right now. People don't. They want to learn. The future of work is learning, is the new mentality, because you don't hire anymore for a certain skill or a certain knowledge, because you don't know what those skills and knowledges will be in a couple of years, because technology is replacing a lot of the skills and knowledges that we know today. And so the HR role right now is to find people who have the human skills that can actually add value to the organization as technology takes place, because people who are motivated to learn and to grow and to and they have the human skills such as empathy, critical thinking, what else? Compassion. There are many, 78. I think there's a list of 78 human skills that machines cannot replace. Sorry, I'm talking too much about the future of HR. So I really believe that right now we should be focusing on ensuring that people are clear of the company's objectives, but more than that is helping our employees understand what their goals are, and helping them achieve those goals, not necessarily as like a job description or a job title or career pathway. It's a different scenario now. It's changing.
I think there's one element here that both the last question and this question have as a core piece to it, is listening to the employees. This is something that I don't hear a lot about. I don't hear a lot about anybody championing employee feedback intake outside of a forum. I mean, having a conversation. I'm a huge fan of one-on-one conversations in my management, and I have one-on-ones with every team member once a week. Now that's very aggressive, and some of those team members don't want it that aggressively, but some of them do. And when I do that, those conversations aren't about work. They're about everything but work. And that allows those conversations around, well, you tell me what your career goals are, and leave it to me to figure out how we can align that with what we need, because that's my job. And I'm in the managing role. I mean, I admit I'm not an HR professional here. I'm the manager guy. And as the manager, my job is to represent the company in those conversations. And I am to be the champion of the company. The staff member, the team member can be passionate about whatever they want to be passionate about. They can be skilled at what they're skilled in. If they're passionate and skilled, but the company doesn't need it, what a wonderful hobby you have. But it's not going to be good for the company. Tying that in, if you have the skill and it's good for the company, but you don't have the passion for it, okay, so it's a chore. Let's see if we can minimize our chores. Let's see what we can do to do that. If you have passion for it, the company needs it, but you don't know how to do it, oh, that's a training opportunity. We can get you training. Training's not a problem. But that paradigm of passion, skill, and what the company needs, as the manager, I'm the representative of that company need, but I have to listen to the employee to find out what the passion and what the skill is. And with that paradigm, I can draw that thing together where I can actually bring the company objectives into the conversation of what they want to achieve, whether that's a career path, whether that's some kind of challenge paradigm that has or has nothing to do with any kind of particular financial or title association or whatever it may be. But if you can have those informal conversations,
but managers should be clear of what the company's objectives are before they are able to have that conversation.
Well, to the previous conversation, we have to arm our managers, yes.
Yeah.
But if they're armed, and they're armed, assuming they have the information and they have what they need, then they can do this. They can go in and they can be a third factor of representation, and they don't need to come in and say, this is the company objective. The company meaning, the goal, the purpose, the reason the company exists, the value the company produces to their customers or to the world, whatever that can be, whether that's widget creation or in my case, software security, where we're keeping people's data and information safe. This is a moral imperative. Whatever it can be, it's a moral imperative. I need to represent that side of the conversation. To represent that well, I need to listen, intake, interpret, and find a way to integrate. And if we can train our leaders, or we can train our team leadership, we can train our managers, the representatives of that company objective, to be able to take that information in and collaboratively work with the staff member to identify a path that bridges that gap. I don't think that the particulars of what it's going to be at any given time period is going to be quite as challenging. Like right now, yes, we're looking at, there's a huge difference in what's important to employees. That was different 5 years ago. It was different 10 years ago. It was different 15 years ago, but listening has never changed.
Mm-hmm.
And the need to take in that information to evaluate and find a way to connect the employee to that objective and find a way to make it a meaningful connection. I think that's an art and a skill set that can't be done in email. It's difficult to do remotely. And in a face-to-face conversation held casually, you can really make that work over time.
You're talking about listening. We do have our first audience question, and it's for Jeff, actually. This person wants to know, don't you find that your approach of saying, hey, you can leave anytime, just let me know and I'll help you, don't you find that results in high turnover?
No, absolutely not.
Yeah, I don't either.
I think turnover happens because turnover happens. And if someone is looking to leave, if I can address that immediately, then I will address it to make the person happy. But if there are issues, things that will never be changed, things that cannot be changed, then that employee will never be happy, no matter what I do to try to save her. And I'd rather have them leave on a good term, remembering our company as a positive experience in their life and their career, and leave and saying, you know what, my cousin's nephew's roommate would love to backfill my role. He is an amazing employee. You should talk to him. And I'm not leaving. I'm leaving because of, I'm moving to Michigan. I'm leaving because of this. I am a big proponent that even when it's ugly, honesty is better than anything. And to me, it ties in, Miles and I definitely, just in the 20 minutes we've known each other, have different ways of seeing the world and looking at it. And I think both of them are right. I don't think that there's different takes. I think about it that it's work, not super duper happy fun time. There's a reason it's called work. And no one likes working. You can love your job, but that is different than working. That's why we all play the lottery. That's why everyone is looking for a get rich quick scheme. And I always joke that one of the worst interview questions people ask is, what would you do if you won $1 million? And the answer they want, oh, I'll come in tomorrow. No problem. Wouldn't change me at all. The real answer is, or at least my answer is, I'll continue to work, just not for you. And that to me is what it all boils down to. And if you acknowledge that, if you recognize that, then you'll have a more honest forum and better work will be done. I love 90% of what I do for a living. but I hate filling in data and paperwork. No one is going to like 100% of what they do. Even the wealthiest movie stars are CEOs, and you have to acknowledge that it is work, not super duper happy fun time, because honesty is the cornerstone to getting the information you need, even when it is ugly.
I'd agree. I actually do agree with Jeff on an aspect of this. I've done both. I've used the devil may care solution. I'll support you and find out what we got to do to get you. I've used that in all cases, and I think there are other factors that actually contribute more to whether someone stays or goes. And I actually will get into using. I'm heavily influenced by Maslow's pyramid of needs when it comes to doing those evaluations. If someone is working for you but they can't make enough money to pay their rent,
How are you going to?
they need to get that solved. And if you can't solve that problem for them, they need to go find that somewhere else. If they can pay their rent, if they can take care of their stuff, but they've got some concerns, like little Johnny has a couple health conditions, and if he has an episode, then it might cost us some more. We don't know if we can afford that. It's not survival, but it is safety. If you get into that kind of environment, then there's a lot of risk focus in the language and a lot of risk focus in the conversation. That I can usually work with. That I usually can turn around. I can actually go to HR and say, what do we have as an internal company support mechanism that we can use to help out the employee? And that usually helps out. After that, you get into the respect level, where the relationship the employee has with the company. If they feel that they're being undervalued, this is something that's really tricky. If they feel they're being undervalued, this is where I think that Jeffrey's approach is wrong. This is where it would actually be destructive to go with that approach. Because if you're being undervalued, getting the value correction is actually, for the company, one of the cheapest solutions to solving an employee discontent issue. Paying somebody a little extra money as opposed to the cost of hiring, searching, hiring, and replacing, training, the loss of work, and all the rest of it. The money doesn't match out. Just the logistics of it doesn't match. So if somebody wants a raise and that raise isn't exorbitant, I mean, we're not talking like triple your pay kind of raise, but if you're talking about a raise that then makes them feel as though they're being paid well enough for their work, and that problem goes away, because pay is a particular sensitive spot. It is only a problem when it's a problem. It's not a benefit when it's not a problem. So paying somebody more money when they already feel like they're being paid reasonably for what they do isn't really going to move the needle on their emotional commitment in a lot of ways, in most cases, in my experience. However, if someone feels they're not being treated properly, not taking care of that will drive them away. And so it's a very cheap solution, honestly, when you have a good employee, and I'm talking about the good employees you want to retain. If they feel like they're being underpaid, it's really cost effective to just go ahead and bump the pay a little bit and get their continued high value, rather than to go the other way. Now, if none of those exist, any one of those contexts exists, and this person is just dissatisfied, they're dissatisfied because they're going through a midlife crisis, or they're dissatisfied because other things are happening, it's just not their place, there isn't much that you can do that's going to convince them to stay. And in this case, now I'm with Jeff. I'm absolutely with Jeff, helping them to find a good future. Hell, I may be working for them one day. I'd like to hedge my own bets.
In the majority of people that I have helped in my career, internally and externally, money was a symptom, not the cause.
Yeah.
And I don't, I read a report just this week that it was like 60% of people look specifically for new work because of their direct manager. And that's something that usually can't be fixed. Money, again, it is, I think it's more the exception than the rule. But I agree with you. I'd much rather fix the problem for a good employee. It's just that in my experience, it's usually not a fixable problem.
And that happens.
Yeah.
I do think that some of it, though, I do think you bring up the really great point, and Lillian brought up something, it's coming along lines, and I really like the tie-in, is we need to train our managers. We need to train these representatives of the company to the employees on how to do this stuff and how to handle this stuff. And I think that is an that's an underserved area in a lot of companies. The transition of individual contributor to manager, where it's like, you did a great job as an individual contributor. Here's the manager title. Congratulations. By the way, nothing you did up till now matters anymore, because the job you're doing now is entirely different, and here are all these extra rules, and good luck. That's not a management training program.
And it's bad when it happens to salespeople. Salespeople make terrible managers, not to be, because they don't get training in, and the skills that make you a really good salesperson usually make you not a great manager. And I've seen it with engineers and every skill set, pretty much, where the skills aren't tied into the skills you need to be a successful manager. And then everyone starts jetting.
We have a great question coming in about this, which kind of actually ties in what you guys are talking about, and also the last item on our agenda, which I am going to push forward to, since we're at the 20-minute mark, just so that you guys have your little subtle hint. But this particular listener was saying that she completely agrees that leaders need to drive conversations and support connections with employees. But the feedback she receives is that the manager doesn't have the time to do that. So how do you overcome that objection? And do you have any tools that you recommend to combat that specific response? Is training the tool to combat that response?
Well, I actually think that that's very common. I've heard that so many times from our clients. I think managers are overwhelmed because of a lot of their role is just increasing with the different expectations that people have from leaders. And these new generations also expect feedback on a regular basis, and continuous conversations about how they can get better. And it's very quick, it's very fast, everything is happening very fast. So I believe that, besides believing that that's normal, I also think that that's also a result of the fact that HR is ill prepared to help to assist managers in that role of leadership. I think HR folks could be acting more as coaches, as mentors to managers, helping find the tools. There are lots of technology and tools that can help managers be more efficient and effective with the things that they don't really need to be the more one-on-one and human contact, human interaction based, right? Anything that can be automated, I believe they should be. And we should leave more space to do this human interactions. Of course, I come from learning and development, and I think the future of work is learning, and I think that will be the way to go. But I don't believe that taking managers to into a long 2-year course or how to be a leader is the way. I think that has to happen as they go, with a lot of coaching, mentoring, sharing information, a lot of social learning, creating an environment where managers feel like they have quick answers to their challenges on a regular basis. And so that's my take on it.
As an HR manager, do you think that the idea of mentoring your employees in your group could be part of a manager's KPI? And I don't even know how to do that. I'm just, I have a blog post coming out about KPIs and sourcing, and how everything is tied into a quarterly basis and behinds and seats. And I don't think that's a great way to measure a KPI, because there's so much more a recruiter offers that they should be measured on things like, how long did the person stay? Did the manager have a positive experience even if the hire wasn't made? All sorts of different things. And adding a KPI of being able to communicate in a way with your team to benefit the company and their career, but I wouldn't even have a guess on how to implement
Hi, how you doing?
it.
So no, I think it's absolutely right. Look, this dials directly into what you're saying is I think is dead on. KPIs, basically, I'm going to translate this to a different language a little bit. You can manage what you measure. If you want to manage your culture, you have to measure your culture. If you
Yes.
want to manage communication with your employees, you have to measure communication with your employees. This is something we don't manage. For managers that don't have time, if you want to manage your time, you have to measure your time. Time management is, so there's two parts to this. One of them is time management. I know that managers feel like they are overwhelmed, and usually newer managers, before they learn how to do time management well for themselves, are, because they end up spending 16 hours a day doing what really should be done in about 10. So notice I didn't say 8, but that's manager world. But the thing is that when you manage these things, to manage these things, you've got to know what you're working with. You've got to be able to measure it. And we don't have measurements for employee engagement in a lot of cases that are actively, regularly maintained in a way which staff are held accountable for.
Mm-hmm.
It's one thing to measure. If you measure it all day long and somebody puts it in a spreadsheet and then you put it on the quarterly report and somebody goes, yep, we made $20 million last quarter and our employee engagement rating is 7. And the amount of waste that we've gotten rid of, we've reduced our waste by 27%. If you're not paying attention and you're not putting accountable results to those KPIs, to those measurements, if you're not holding them accountable, they don't get enforced, then you're not managing it. Managing it is not just measuring, it's also measuring and enforcing. If we come up with a way where we do that, and you were saying, you don't know what to measure. Well, this is a case of identifying what value you really want to get out of that employee engagement. Identify specifically what you want to get. If you get down to the specifics of what you want back out of it and the business value that it has, if that's morale and the positive impact that morale has, getting back to the core value of why we want to be employee engaged from a business perspective. Because honestly, look, you want to do this stuff, you want to tie accountability into it, you want to hire or fire somebody based on some kind of KPI, you need executive engagement. You need executive engagement, you better have a business case. If you don't have a business case, it doesn't matter. So this isn't a happy feel good. Like you said, work is work. Happy feel good is great if you can afford it. A business case is always about what we need to deal with. So having that case where we want to engage these measurements, we want these measurements to be held accountable to, and I use hire and fire as the extreme. I don't mean to say that that's where you should go with it. I do prefer positive reinforcement with awards and recognition, and awards and recognition coming into places of maybe preferential projects, maybe preferential positioning. These kinds of things are valuable to more leadership positions over certain other things. And so you end up with, if you're willing to do that and you're able to do that, you're going to change the dimension of what you're after. We're talking in general terms about communication. Don't talk in general terms about communication when it comes to figuring out what you want to measure. Talk in specific terms about the benefits you want to see. Making our employees feel better is not a good thing to try to measure. Making our employees engaged isn't even a good one. Getting employee engagement is too generic. You want to say, I want voluntary. Google at one point in their 1-year interview, they had here's one of Google's measurements from the rumor mill. At your 1-year anniversary, they ask you what you did, and you tell them, and they said, great, that's all in your job description. What else did you do? It was expected that you did something outside your job description. And if you didn't, they sent you away and they brought somebody else in to replace you. It's a cultural idea that kind of thing would happen. And it's difficult.
Talking about rewards, recognition, and going above and beyond, I actually wrote this slide here that it's, important to make sure people feel rewarded for even small wins. But we had an audience member write in saying that they're not sure they agree with that. And they do think that it shouldn't be the employee's ability to reach a goal that matters, but going above and beyond is what should be rewarded. And I noticed, Miles, that you did bring up talking about rewards not necessarily having to be financial. They can be preferential projects and things like that. So I just want to throw this out there. What are your thoughts on what should be celebrated and rewarded? And should it be everything, including, what's in your job description, or should it only be for what goes above and beyond? And obviously, I'm opening this up to all three of you as well to discuss.
Well, I have an approach on this that I like very much. I have a sliding scale. I have 4 levels. One level is you didn't do the job. Okay, we need to correct. Level 1 is you did the job. Yay. Level 2, you went above and beyond. Level 3 is you went so far above and beyond in one area of your job that another area of your job suffered. And so you have, and I basically use a 1 to 5 scale. 1 is a complete failure, like we didn't even touch it. 2 is we missed the target. 3, we hit the target. 4, we exceeded the target. 5, we exceeded the target significantly, but at the cost of something else of value. That doesn't make 5 necessarily a positive result. But I think that using that measurement system allows me to have a conversation about, okay, did you do the job? Yeah, you did. Thank you. And it doesn't need to go any further than that. Just acknowledgement of that sometimes is reward enough. I think that there is a need for acknowledgement, even for the smallest wins. Now, when you get into rewards, now that becomes a question of, how are we going to go above and beyond of just acknowledgement and recognition of the achievement? Honestly, I think a culture of acknowledgement is a good one. It's easy, it's cheap, it doesn't cost anything. It's 5 extra seconds in a meeting. And it creates a culture of appreciation. And a culture of appreciation is a better place to work. It's just a more positive, more easygoing place to work. So I don't think that's a case of talking about rewards. Acknowledgement of a job, of getting a win, getting a success, particularly if you can frame it in the context of a contribution to a team and a team success and a team ability, is really great. When you get into rewards, now I like to go into those higher levels and do distinguish between rewards, which is for the above and beyond, in my view. But I want to make sure that we don't omit the acknowledgement of even the smallest win, even if you're not going to go above and beyond for any other.
I'm gonna ask you, Miles, a crazy question, but it bears into what I'm gonna say. Do you believe in the current milieu of awarding participation awards just for showing up to the soccer game? You see where I'm going with this?
I know where you're going, and the question, I think
Go ahead, kids.
I think the question is a false question.
How so?
Because you're separating an individual from the team in this context. And I don't talk about participation awards, the participation concept for an individual. I don't subscribe to that. However, what I do is I say, instead of focusing on the participation award of the individual, it's the capability of the team by everyone participating that we reward. And through that, we give an indirect reward to the individual. And that has fostered the development of great teams, which I think is really more important than trying to, I think that when you build a great team, the esprit de corps, the team building, the team collaboration that comes with that rewards the individuals in that team far more, in many more subtle ways, in many more primal ways than trying to tackle it as an individual and doing an individual participation type recognition.
I want to think harder about what you said, because I definitely don't see it that way. I would want to evaluate not based on the work you did, but based on what you did, based on what my expectations of were you. And by that, I mean, so many things are out of an individual's control that I remember after Lehman Brothers went down, that I went from 300 to 400K a year in commission to 48K the next year. And I worked just as hard. I was commissioned employee, and anyone who's been commissioned knows how those things work. I like an evaluation based on a holistic approach as opposed to a direct meeting of KPIs, if you will. Which is not to say it's not needed. It depends on the role. It's the same way we measure certain things, and goes back to what Lilian was talking about, the emotional quotient versus the intellectual quotient. And I don't see it as a versus. I see it as a big holistic thing, which is many reasons I've turned down management roles, because I know I would have to do the things you're talking about, and I don't agree with them, but I know that's how it's done, and it might even be the best way to do it. I'm still a hippie at heart, Miles. I'm sorry. I just
and I get
I'm not saying you're
it's
wrong.
really hard to measure hippiedom. It really, really is. I love it. I love the good nature. I love it. I really do, because you're a better person. Really, you are. But it's really hard to measure.
No, I'm not. It's all, and just to take it really to the nth degree, one of my favorite quotes is, just because something never has been doesn't mean it cannot be. And I believe that with all my heart, and then I'll tell you that it was Chairman Mao who said it, but we can move on from there. It's still a great quote.
Well, I'm going to use your comments about turning down management roles to segue directly into a question for Lilian in our last 3 minutes, which is, we do have an audience member who's curious that, based on what you were saying about management, do you think everyone can be a manager, or do you think some people really shouldn't be?
Yeah, no, I think that no, it's not for everyone. That's my personal opinion. I think some people are, and it doesn't mean that some people can not change. It's a, I mean, it's a mix of finding a person who has that combination of emotional and intelligence cue, but also that is aligned with and embraced into the company's culture, and it's also a fit sometimes for, you know, the team that they are involved with. It's a combination of so many things. Sometimes someone can be a very good manager at one organization and be a terrible manager at another, and sometimes, yeah, some people are. I was going to give an example in the discussion before of a company that I was talking to recently, that they have a very particularly transparent way of coaching relationship between managers and employees, and they say literally, I don't want you to expect me to give you feedback. I want you to tell me when you need a feedback, or I need you to tell me exactly what you accomplished. For me to know that I need to give you a feedback, because I don't have time to keep thinking. It's this lack of empathy, or also it's the lack of human interaction in person, right? Because we're working remotely a lot of times. So I don't know what you're doing. You have to tell me, and I don't know how you're doing, and you know, we rarely see each other, so I can't read. I can't have a sense of what you need exactly as a manager.
Do you really see? Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to speak over you.
No, I know. I was just going to finish there, saying that you know, some managers need that kind of culture, because they are not going to have that ability to meet the expectations of people when it regards to feedback and coaching.
My question was going to be about it being empathy, or about the value of what we're able to accomplish in a day. And the example I give of that is in my industry, in my business of recruiting and sourcing, the biggest complaint we get is that we don't give candidates feedback. But our biggest KPI is putting them behind in a seat. So if someone does poorly, for whatever reason, you didn't send them to the right role, so they did poorly, most recruiters go, okay, I need my next person, because I'm not measured on being nice to the person who didn't get it. I'm measured by how many people I place.
Yeah.
So what maybe that the issues of the manager giving feedback is not that they're not empathetic, not that they don't want to. It's that they're being measured on making project X hit Z level, and telling someone how they're doing, whether they're doing well or poorly, it isn't, in my opinion, it is essential to meeting the project goal. But in the day-to-day, in a company judging you on quarterly performance, maybe it isn't in that manager's mind essential, and maybe part of our job would have to help the manager understand why she needs to give feedback, because it feeds into the other things.
I mean, that's a very good point. I agree with that.
I'm really sorry to have to say this. We've got so many people writing in saying an hour was not long enough for this. This was a fantastic
I agree.
Our audience really, but it is 1:30 over here on the Pacific Coast. I do have to thank all of you for participating in this panel today, and and to the audience, of course, for participating as well, because it's their questions, I think, that are they're the ones that make it really interesting. I also want to make sure that we thank Impraise, and I'm actually going to go right back to their slide again, because it was brought to my attention that I did not have this showing at the beginning of the episode. So of course we want to thank Impraise, our sponsor, for helping us to make this happen. And Lillian, Miles, Jeffrey, what can I say? You guys are amazing. Thank you so much for coming on today.
Thank you.
Thank you for inviting us.
Thank you.
You all have a great rest of your day. I hope we get to work together soon.
Yes, thank you. Bye, everyone.
I'll have to close after the hippie comment with. He's out.